Thank you. Happy New Year, Madam President. It's nice to see you. And as we begin our new year, I rise to continue our discussion on one of the most pressing matters that has been so hard on our country. That is our open southern border and the responsibility for this Senate to take meaningful action. Since this chamber last was in session, each of us have traveled back to our respective states and have had the opportunity to talk with our constituents about what they're thinking and what they're seeing. And hands down, I can tell you, the crisis on our southern border is on the tip of everybody's tongue in terms of asking questions. It is the #1 issue for my state of West Virginia. And time again, across a multitude of conversations, West Virginians have asked me pretty logical questions. When will enough be enough? When will President Biden finally wake up and realize that this is a crisis? What can Congress do to stop this? And what are you, me, as a member of the Senate, going to do about it? They see the numbers in the news. We saw them all through December. The mass humanitarian costs broadcasted on our TV sets daily, and the destruction that the flow of illicit drugs is doing and causing in our communities. So I share their frustration, and I've voiced it many times here on the floor. The crisis of our southern border is a topic that I have addressed repeatedly. The chronic failure of this president to act has led to the point where even my colleagues across the aisle, everyone, has begun to raise alarm as the consequences of the administration's bad border policy have become undeniable. One of my colleagues referred to the border as porous. That's kind of a nice way of saying it's open and very, very easy to get through. I'm not sure when it was what finally led to this universal recognition, but I do have some ideas. It could have been the 2.4 million migrant encounters this past fiscal year, 2.4 million. I live in a state of a little less than 1.8 million. My entire state came through that border and more. On the month after month of record illegal crossings, with the largest month being just this past December of 302,000 encounters this past December, or the over 10,000 illegal encounters that we're experiencing daily, which is the size of many of the small towns in my state, with the record being 12,600 again in December. 12,600 crossings in December. Or the record 169 encounters with individuals on our terror watch list just this past fiscal year, with an additional 30 encounters the first 2 months of FY24. These are people that we know have terrorist ties, that we know could be a danger to us, and yet we're catching them as they're joining this brigade of millions coming across our southern border. This is just an untenable national security crisis, one where we have no way of knowing how many terrorists have evaded apprehension and are now in the heartland of our country. So this is a risk that we cannot take, not now, not ever. And yet, very little, if any, and I'd say none, has been taken by this administration to really remedy the situation. There's been a lapse in this border security under the president, and a subsequent mass flow of immigration is creating a real live humanitarian crisis of drug smuggling and human trafficking. In fact, there is somebody who's thriving during this. The cartels are thriving with this $1 billion of business with our wide open southern border. It's important to remember that really, I believe that this catastrophe is entirely the making of our president. And while congressional Republicans did not cause this, we are now taking the responsibility, along with our colleagues on the other side of the aisle, of trying to address it and make meaningful addressing. This is why we need substantive policy changes to address our broken border. It has become increasingly obvious that now is the time to act. Doing nothing will result in what? The continuation of 10,000 people a day, encounters per day on our southern border, and cover for the cartels to smuggle drugs and traffic people. Doing nothing will result in the news like we got just, I think, yesterday or maybe earlier today. A New York City high school is being overtaken and housing migrants for shelter, and the students are being told that they should engage in remote learning. In other words, don't come to school. We're using the school to house illegal migrants, and you do remote learning at school. Well, what did we learn during COVID about remote learning? It's not good for our students. A consistent remote learning program that we tried during COVID, you could see our falling test scores and a lot of mental health issues at the same time. So doing nothing will only increase the national security threats that our country is facing. Therefore, doing nothing is unacceptable. So, in a moment as critical as this, we cannot let the perfect be the enemy of the good. We are currently in a historically narrowly divided Congress, making bipartisanship an essential component in getting legislation across the finish line. And that's what our Senate negotiators are engaged in. We all talk about how bad the situation is at the southern border, but it's irresponsible to talk about the problem while refusing to solve it unless you get 100% of what you want. Now, I've been here several years. I can honestly say there are very few times I get 100% of everything I want in a bill. If we do not take this opportunity to make serious reforms, then the current crisis will continue with no end in sight. And we cannot do that. As negotiations continue, we await the text of a final agreement. The question that will soon be before us will not be whether this is a bill that each of us would have personally written, because it won't be, but rather if we will take this opportunity and make serious reforms, the most serious reforms in decades, serious reforms to help stop the overwhelming number of encounters that our Border Patrol agents see every day and take back control of our southern border. We must bring order and process back to our immigration policies. So I admire the steadfast, in particular, dedication from my colleague from Oklahoma, Senator Lankford, who's personally called many of us, called me 3 times over Christmas. I know he didn't get much of a break with his family. He has displayed incredible strength throughout this process. I encourage my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to recognize the importance of this moment and the urgent need to respond to the challenges that we have in front of us. As always, I maintain my optimism. I'm hoping next week we'll get the text and we can work that bill through this body and remain confident in this chamber's ability to deliver. We must take advantage of this opportunity. I've never been at the cusp of an opportunity like this in the last 20 years on immigration that we have right now, something that will make a difference. So we have to take advantage of this, and we have to make sure that we're making meaningful changes as we're moving through this process. So with that, Madam President, I yield the floor.